Narrative Therapy for Grieving Individuals by Sean Brooks for Cornerstone University, Techniques of Counseling. The technique I am introducing is called Narrative Strategies. A beautiful quote by Michael Schreiner is, "Narrative therapy uses externalizing conversations to separate the person from the problem in order to see the problem clearly and objectively as something distinct and separate, something that can be dealt with on its own terms." Those that are grieving the loss of a loved one often feel guilty, alone, and anguished. How does narrative therapy help those that are grieving? Narrative therapy can assist greatly in this. Schreiner also states that, in externalizing grief, we no longer are only seeing ourselves as a griever, but rather seeing grief as something that is its own entity. This is specifically useful because when we can see something as its own outside identity and entity, we can conceptualize it as something that we can overcome. We don't feel like we are the problem and that we cannot change. For this presentation, we will take a look at a specific strategy called retelling the narrative of the death. As someone that has worked in the hospice field, I can say from personal experience that more often than not, there are a lot of factors surrounding death. People don't always pass when they are done living their best and fullest life. Although this sounds like common sense, often it is hard to realize that in a moment when a loved one is taken from us unexpectedly due to disease, when they are given less than 6 months to remain alive on this earth. More often than not, individuals are not naturally able to just deal and just work through it on their own. It seems to be a gross cultural myth that this should be something that we're able to do on our own, something that we're just supposed to deal with and move on. Many times, we as individuals process things differently from one another. Some are internal processors, and some are external processors, and some fall somewhere in between. This being said, is why I decided to dive into the retelling the narrative of the death tool. We as humans find our self-narratives to be valuable and vital. When we lose a loved one, we are often thrown off balance, to put it very lightly. What population would be able to find purpose in the retelling the narrative of the death tool? The person that has lost a loved one in an unexpected, violent, or harsh fashion. Guidelines for retelling the narrative of the death include retelling the story of the loss from the beginning to the end. It's recommended to be 10 to 15 minutes at the very least. It's beneficial to provide the story from when the death is undeniable or when the individual finds out it ends, when that day is done, or what the dying individual means to them when they're deceased. The individual may close their eyes and use pictures to emphasize stories and how they feel. This kind of process can help individuals figure out where their loss fits into their own life story. Essentially, narrative retelling can make the individual feel validated for the issues they are facing. It has been said that many people are faced with silence and failed attempts to provide empathy to the individual. It's very important and crucial to stay with the individual when they are retelling their stories, even during the hard times when it's hard to listen. It's important to listen and validate them until they can face the issue with feeling less anguish. Through the narrative processes with a therapist, an individual can find that they are reliving events and seeing things in a way that add to their life story. In closing, a quote by Michael Schreiner is one that is soul-touching. "Grief is the multifaceted response to a change in a customary pattern of living. Thoughts and emotions are usually all over the map, and there's also usually a great deal of ambivalence."